You guys may have watched the State of the Union last night, and I thought it was actually pretty decent, especially on the domestic stuff. Pretty decent. The foreign policy stuff was kind of all made up. And then there was a nice little, kumbaya thing at the end. So let's watch a little bit, and then we'll get into it.
And I commit to every Republican here tonight that I will not only seek out your ideas, I will seek to work with you to make this country stronger. Because I want this chamber, I want this city to reflect the truth that for all our blind spots and shortcomings, we are a people with the strength and generosity of spirit to bridge divides, to unite in common effort, to help our neighbors, whether down the street or on the other side of the world.
All right, work together. I like that when he clasps the hands, he kind of leans in and whispers. I feel like if I had a 3D TV, he would be kissing me. But, all right, struck a nice, decent tone. Work together. Mm-hmm. This is Washington. That's just words, right?
Right. So there's a difference between a good speech and an effective speech. And I think this was just kind of a speech that was meant to be effective enough to let everyone know that he's still hanging in there, he still has a plan, but not to define exactly what it is. At some point, he defined his goals for the country as broad. Right. And that speech was just a broad speech. He's not trying to deliver the Gettysburg Address here. He's just trying to say something that doesn't really piss off either side of the aisle, so he could say he's trying to work with everyone. So it was a good speech, but he didn't really say anything besides generalizations.
So that's pretty much how I feel, that most of these things at this point, they're just speeches, they're just a lot of words. Partisanship now, I get it, the Republicans don't want to work with him, he doesn't really want to work with them. Mm-hmm. You could argue which side is more to blame and all that. But do you feel moved by any of these things at this point? Because it's nice, all that stuff was nice, and it goes to our better parts, right? But do you feel moved when you hear that stuff?
Yeah, well, two things. I mean, I think, for one, I disagree. I think he does actually truly deep down want to work with the Republicans, and I think he can say that and mean it, because it's not going to happen anyway, right? Like the way the political system is set up,
right. So that actually gives him more of a ease to say it in a way.
Exactly. It lets him off the hook to a certain extent. Stronger with that and said, look, I'm trying to work with you, but I wish he could have talked. He talked about gridlock a little bit, but he could have emphasized that a little more. The speech was a little more peaceful and a little bit more. Look, he's heading the home stretch, so he can kind of set it out there like, hey, I'm trying to work with you and let's do it together. But
he was playing a lot of the old hits, right?
Yes.
Like, and those were the ones getting the most applause anyway, right? He was playing a bunch of old tunes and like talking about working together and about using a lot of great rhetoric that we loved him for and that we elected him for. And without any potential repercussions for that, because there's nothing else that he can really accomplish with a Senate and a Congress that aren't on his side.
Well, it's very rhetorical instead of actually calling to action, saying he was like, I'm willing to work with you. I'm willing to hear. Basically, it was like an open door policy boss or manager at work. Like, hey, I'm willing to listen to any ideas you guys have. Just feel free to come to me. I'm open door cool guy boss. And instead of saying, I would like to get things done just because I'm coming to the end of this term doesn't mean that you could stop me down for another 2 years. Shutting down the government won't work anymore, gridlock, and this is all going to happen. The Republicans are going to stop down these things anyway and shut him down, but I think he could have called them out a lot stronger.
But if you think about it, like if that was a CEO who had a 4-year tenure and then had to get reelected into CEO and then was 2 years into his last couple of years, he'd be looking for very quick things and be focusing on primarily the optics of his leadership and not on getting things done within that 2 years.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Do you guys think it's interesting the way he tries to appear to be above the political system in a way, while he's obviously very much in it? He is the head of the Democratic Party, but he does a lot of this lofty stuff. That to me is the disconnect. Like, he's saying all this stuff, and I get it, but it's not 6 years ago. Like, that's what I kept thinking the whole speech. I was like, wow, 6 years ago, we were all in love with this guy, the whole country. Like, it seems like we were all on drugs.
Well, we all were like, hope and change, and that's exactly what we want, and then we didn't really get that. It's not that President Obama's done anything. He has done so much. So when people, say that he hasn't done anything as a leader, I don't agree with that at all.
Yeah, we have health insurance. I'm not shitting on the guy altogether.
But I think it goes back to what you said. I think you perfectly articulated it when you said that a CEO in his home stretch isn't going to try to rattle any cages. He's just going to point out the things that he's done and try to make sure that it looks like he's had a good tenure.
Make sure his legacy was amazing.
Exactly, but this is a person who, as you said, got elected on hope and change and shaking it up and making sure that we're all, you know, it was almost like the shock and awe of campaigning basically with him. Yeah. So I understand how politically what he did strategically would be the right thing to do in a State of the Union address. However, just like you were saying, it doesn't match what his political manifesto was to continue to be above the fray of being a politician.
Right. So go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to say. I mean, I think so. I worked in the White House when the first midterm elections happened, and they were devastating, despite everyone being really optimistic about it. And what became so ultimately clear from being there is that regardless of the rhetoric and how good his intentions are and how hard of workers there are and how passionate the people are who work for him, because my God, they were some of the most incredible people I've ever worked with, there are no incentives for the Republican Party to let any wins occur within this presidency, bipartisan especially, because if they do, then no Republicans will continue to get elected, and that's worst case scenario, not the country falling apart.
And especially now, because knowing that he's a lame duck at this point, now there's really no incentive, because now you want to take him, if you're a Republican, you want to take him down as far.
Take down the legacy of the entire party. Yeah.
So keeping his legacy intact is the most important thing, but it still does, again, go to what you're saying, that if he's supposed to really be that leader that he says, he wouldn't just play out the political scenario we expect.
Right. So do you think, speaking of the midterm thing, so I think one of his lasting legacies is going to be that the Democrats got crushed in both off-year elections.
But that always happens. I mean, it happens when there's a Republican. And
right, but doesn't it seems particularly weird with this guy? Like, everyone hates the Republicans, yet seemingly everyone hates the Republicans.
Well, it's also
and yet they got crushed just a couple months ago.
He set expectations really high, right? Like that's sort of a critical. The critical realization is that, like, he set expectations so high there was no possible way to hit them. Yeah. Right? Like, you go into a relationship being like, I'm going to be the best fucking girlfriend you have ever had in your entire life, and you, like, fuck up once or twice, it's going to be devastating, as opposed to being like, you know, I'm not that great at these things, and sandbagging a little bit and then just blowing away everyone. Yeah.
Final thought on this. Did you guys think there were two separate things? So I thought all the middle class stuff was good. The insurance stuff, like all the taxing stuff, I basically am on board with. All that stuff sounded good. But the foreign policy stuff, which he just kind of skimmed over in like 2 minutes, and ISIL's on the retreat. Just this morning I saw Joe Biden talking about how we need troops on the ground. He sort of let it slip out of his mouth because they're not on retreat. I feel like that's where he's really kind of screwed. Like, Europe's a freaking mess right now. The Middle East is a total mess. So that part I thought just didn't jive with the truth. Yeah. The other part I thought was pretty good.
Well, he spent a lot of time talking in these, you know, anecdotal stories, this anecdotal evidence about how the country is doing well. You know, just kind of the Joe Plumber almost type approach of talking about, you know, so-and-so has health insurance now, and so-and-so now can afford to feed her kids, which is great, but it was a little bit more glazed over and kind of, it's read like it's storyboarded like a Claritin commercial or something. You know, rather than talking about the fact that, you know, we have like serious terror threats or anything, he was like, well, you know, let's just give some talks about what somebody in the Midwest possibly can do to buy a loaf of bread now.
Right. That's funny. I want to know what the side effects are at the end. That's what they should give you, like the 20 side
really
effects.
Fast talking side effects.
What do you think of the foreign policy stuff?
Look, I think there's a really inherent tension for liberals when it comes to foreign policy stuff, and especially the hard foreign policy stuff, right? Yeah. Terrorist, disaster, Muslim states. What do we do about that? Because on the one hand, as a liberal, you're taught freedom of religion and freedom of cultural expression, so important, the most important thing. Everyone's different, and that's fine. And on the other hand, you have to also protect freedom of speech and civil rights and human rights. And when there's a religion, and not everyone in the religion, and certainly not every country that is a Muslim country, but hundreds of millions, you know, perpetrating these things that cross those lines, how do you address that, right? And how do you do it in a way that is sensitive and PC and sort of pansy, and also
but you just
really
don't talk about it?
Right. So what do you think the answer is? Because we talk about this a lot on the show. Like, as a liberal, I have to stand for liberal principles. That's what Bill Maher says. I totally agree with that. And yet I don't want to push what I believe on everybody. Yet there's some seriously fucked up shit which we're going to talk about later in the show going on over there. So that's why I think he's sort of caught. That's why that part didn't jive right with me. With him.
Yeah, and it's also it's just the part of being president that I can't even fathom having to make decisions on, right? Yeah. Like, I can fathom making decisions on education policy and on pretty much any domestic policy, right? I can fathom that. I live here. I see these people walking down the street. I've always lived in big cities. That makes sense to me.
But just because we can't fathom it doesn't mean that the leader of the free world shouldn't be able to not only fathom it, but address it in the State of the Union.
Sure. Yeah. I just can't necessarily fault him for any of the decisions that he's had to make, given how smart the people are he surrounded
it's
himself
tough.
with.
In a weird way, it's almost like two separate jobs. Like you should be president domestically, and then someone else should be in charge of the foreign policy stuff. Anyway, we shall see how the next 2 years go.